that ball moving or is it a prop? That is a great question from Mr. Stuke, wrench holder. Card number 116. It's Mr. Eddie Youst of the Washington Senators. Shout out to my friend Brent from Star Huddle 77. Yeah, I don't know, but I think no matter what, the truth is Eddie's having a great time fielding that ball that looks like it has stopped dead right in front of his glove. Not to mention that there's clearly another Senator in the background just kind of hanging out. So I don't think this is an action shot. If it is card number 116 from the 1953 Bowman Color set, it must be session number 116 of Card Room Live. And it is not a Mets hat, Mookie. I knew you were going to say that. It is a New York Giants hat. It is a brand new New York Giants hat. I'm very excited to have finally found a New York Giants hat. Made by a company called Moonlight Graham. I'm going to show this label. This is my Phillies hat, which I wear quite often. And you can see the label on here. Moonlight Graham. This was a company out of like the early 2000s, I think, that they made a whole bunch of retro hats, including this one, which I found brand new online. I really needed a New York Giants hat, so here we are. So you can save that Mets talk for another time, Mookie. By the way, this is not a show. It is a hangout for fellow vintage collectors. We've got some guests, but even when we don't have guests, we like to waste time looking at and talking about old cardboard, and through it all, we try to make it time well wasted. If you're here with us live, welcome. Welcome to my fellow YouTubers. Welcome to the commenters, to the folks from Instagram, the folks from X, from all over the social media landscape. If you happen to be listening to this later, whether you are going to or coming home from work, sorting cards, looking at eBay, rolling out meatballs. I just had meatballs for dinner. Walking the dog, sitting on the john, putting the kids to bed, wondering if Eddie Wakus may come up in conversation. I've got my fingers crossed. Wondering what other kind of Mike foolery we'll get into tonight. Whatever you might be doing, I hope you get something out of it. If you have ideas for future sessions or just want to get in touch, you can email me at bowman53channel@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram, bowman53_Alex X. It's 1953 Bowman Color. And of course, all that information can be found in the description below. This session of Card Room Live is brought to you by Bologna Gum, the biggest piece of bubble gum in the world for just a penny. Bologna blows bigger bubbles. Bologna Gum, the sweet that lasts longer. Let's see who is in the chat. Before we let our guests in here and get started, we've got a wrench holder. Second Sunday in a row that Mike is leaving the first comment, as a true wrench holder would do. Mr. Orlando Collector's Dream is here. Rocket Rick is here. Good to see you, Rick. Mike Polina is here. Peter B is here. Rob the Baseball Time Traveler. Lonely Basement Baseball Cards. Another wrench holder, Don from Don's Field of Dreams. Stephen with a PH, who's got a great Jackie Robinson collection that was just featured on Dan's channel. Low Grade, No Grade Vintage is here. Peacemaker Cards. Litzy Sports Cards. Eddie's Cardboard Chaos. Another wrench holder who is a total big deal. Larry is here. Peeps is here. Diamond Gems 45. Andrew is here. Yeah, I guess it could be sponsored by Moonlight Graham because I think that company's defunct, so I don't think they would have a problem with it. Let's see. Lefty ND10 is here. Are you saying that you're going to be in my neck of the woods? Because if you are, you got to reach out to me, man. Let's get together. College Shot Cards is here. Sideboy Special. Hugo is here. Dean. I'm trying to catch up. There's so many folks in here. It's great to see everybody. Mike Good. Mr. Jesse Think Blue 77. Timeless Cardboard is here. Will I not be live next Sunday? I might be here. We'll see what happens. Yeah, Steven, you did a great job. You have a great collection. Okay, so we got some people waiting in here. We've got a lot of cards to look at. So let's get these folks in here. I've invited several YouTubers to join me in another round of looking at some cards and sharing stories. We did this last Sunday. It seemed to go pretty well. I know I had a good time. We're going to do it again. So let's get these folks in here. First of all, we've got a gentleman who is a longtime Card Room Live friend. In fact, he was the very first gentleman to ever leave a comment on a Card Room Live video, Mr. Reese, ND Card Ranger. What's up, Reese?
Hey, Alex. Thanks, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. Good to see you, man. And then we've got a gentleman who's taking a break from his duties at Four Collectors, John, 3D 80s kid. What's up, John?
Great to be here, Alex. Thanks.
Great to have you, man. It's going to be fun. And we also have a brand new guest, relatively new channel. Great to meet this guy and glad to have him on Card Room Live. It's Josh from Vintage Card Wonderland. Josh, what's going on?
Hey, Alex. How you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming, man. This is going to be great. So I've asked these guys, similar to last Sunday, to pull a handful of cards, 3 to 4 cards roughly based on the time that we've got. And the idea is 3 or 4 cards that you find perhaps are underappreciated, or maybe they're just cards that you really like that perhaps don't get a lot of love in the hobby, and maybe share an anecdote or two about that player from his life or his career, anything you want. And so this is going to be fun, I think, just to sort of take a look at everybody's collection and hear some stories. So, Josh, we're going to start with you. Get us started.
Okay. Well, I'm sure some of you from watching my channel know a couple of years, about a year and a half ago, I started getting pretty heavily into Topps Venezuela cards. And one of the sets or the subsets within a set was the 1967 Topps Venezuela Retorados. And that set is a 50-card set chock full of Hall of Famers, Joe DiMaggio, Babe Ruth, Satchel Paige, Lou Gehrig. And kind of sandwiched within that set are a handful of kind of lesser known non-Hall of Famers. So as I start to build that set, there were some of those cards in those of those players, which kind of piqued my interest. So I picked a couple of cards from that set of some of the kind of obviously lesser known players within that set, and have a greater appreciation for them certainly after building this. So the first one that I have is Beto, or also we know him as Bobby Avila.
Oh yeah.
This is his 67 Retorado, and just a really fantastic, all the Retorados kind of have a fantastic kind of aqua blue and red and kind of sepia kind of tone to them.
Right.
But so I thought, well, I should get to know him a little bit more.
Yeah.
So, I kind of took the deep dive, and he is Beto, known as Beto in Mexico, known as Bobby in the United States. And he was a Mexican professional second baseman and one of the most successful Mexican players in Major League history. So he played for 11 seasons. He had a career WAR of a 28.4, 281 batting average, 359 on base percentage, around 1,300 hits, 80 home runs, around almost 500 RBIs. He was a native of Veracruz, Mexico, and began his career playing for the Puebla Angeliers of the Mexican League. And he played in the 40s, from 43 to 47. He ended up playing 10 years in the majors, and he played mostly for the Cleveland Indians for the majority of that time. In 54, he won the American League batting championship with a 341 average. And he also received the Sporting News American League Player of the Year. So, and then in his peak years, we're kind of in the early 50s. So in 51, he had a string of from 51 to 55 of 5 strong seasons, where he started in at least 135 games, played for the Indians. And in those five seasons, he compiled an average of 301 and 374 on base percentage and 839 hits. So he had a really productive year. So his biggest year, in 54, he had the best season of his career. And despite breaking his right thumb, which happened when Hank Bauer slid into him at second base, He had a batting average at that time of 392 at the time of his injury, and that definitely fell after that point. But then he rebounded a little bit, and he ended the season with an average of 341, on base percentage of 402, 15 home runs, 67 RBIs, and he won the American League Batting Championship that year. So I found that just fascinating. And then his later years were kind of capped off by a couple of things. He retired from baseball, and they named a couple of stadiums after him in Mexico, one in Veracruz and one in Cancun. And then he later he purchased a Mexican baseball team, which I thought was interesting, the Veracruz Eagles. And then he later became president of the Mexican League. So in 71, he was inducted in the Mexican Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame. And then in 80, he went into politics and was elected the mayor of his home city of Veracruz.
Awesome.
He served 2 3-year terms in the Mexican National Legislature. So he passed at the age of 80. And then he was, in 2010, he was humorously, post his passing, he was inducted into Latino Hall of Fame. And so I just found that fascinating, just not only his history within baseball, but post-baseball, what he was able to do. And I found it fascinating that the Venezuelan, within Venezuela, within that set, they thought of him so highly that they're placing him within a set of all of these kind of epic all-time greats, that they wanted their own kind of stamp on their history and their legacy within the game from some of these Latin American players. So I thought that was interesting.
Absolutely. As you were kind of going through his stats, it dawned on me, like I've got my displays behind me, and in my displays I only have 6 of my Bowman color cards displayed right now, but one of them happens to be the Avila, and this is one of my absolute favorites, just because it's a great pose. But I mean, also, like yourself, started when I got the card, read about him, and all the stuff you kind of went through was like taking me back to learning about this guy from the beginning. Fantastic player, and a great start to this. So, Josh, thank you. Okay, Reese, let's go to you.
All right. So, Alex, I took I don't want to say a different approach, but I have some of my favorite cards, but for the players that I feel aren't kind of appreciated or just not talked about a lot, right? So some of my favorite cards and interesting cards, but the first player was a key player in Connie Mack's A's when he first started managing. Slugger, team leader for a decade. And this is Harry Davis. And this is the Dockerman and Sons gum card.
Yeah.
And I mean, Harry Davis was an unbelievable player. He, started out in 1901 with the A's, but we didn't start there, but then he became a member of the A's in 1901. But that was also the first year that Connie Mack was managing the team. And right off the bat, Harry Davis was a leader on the team for the next decade, from 1900 to 1910. There were no other players in baseball that hit more home runs than Harry Davis. It's I don't know. I was just shocked by that stat. On the list behind him, I have him here are Sam Crawford and Wagner and Charlie Heckman, all these guys that you would Nap Lajoie. But Harry Davis hit the most home runs from 1900 to 1910. And his best year was in 1905, where he basically led the league in runs, doubles, home runs, RBIs. So it was interesting because I didn't realize he was that important to Connie Mack and the team.
Right.
But he was the home run, leader. He was like third in doubles for that decade, fourth in RBIs. And again, Sam Crawford, all these guys are around him in that list. That I was like, man, like, how did I not know about Harry Davis more about him?
Right.
So he ended up, playing there till 1911. He won 2 World Series with them. Helped them win 2 World Series in 1910, 1911. But that time his power was waning a little bit, and in like 1911 is when Home Run Baker came on the scene, and he was the new kind of name and, was hitting all the home runs. But he left in 1 year in 1912 to go to Cleveland. And just to show you how much he was important to the game and to the A's and that buildup of Connie Mack's team, he brought him back in 1913 as a player and a manager for 4 years.
Oh, okay.
And in 1913, he won the third World Series with them as well as a player and a manager. And I just don't, I don't know, I guess, I don't think of Harry Davis as, man, like Slugger, Sam Crawford, like all those names,
Yeah.
So I just felt like that card, but especially he was not really, a name that we talk about a lot and appreciate as far as that goes. Sure. He has an interesting little tidbit of information. In 1950, and again, this was in his later in his career, he was just a really pinch hitter and a manager now for Connie Mack, or for Westcliff, I should call him Cornelius McGillicuddy. I guess that's the proper.
Yes. Yes.
But he was playing in the game. Well, he was on the bench, and it was 1915, and in town came the Boston Red Sox, and there was a young pitcher in 1915 on the Boston Red Sox called Babe Ruth, and Babe Ruth had a shutout going through 9 innings. And in the bottom of the 9th inning, he walked the first batter. Babe Ruth walked the first batter. The next batter got a hit. And then, as fate would be, there was 2 guys on. They moved over to second and third. 2 on, 2 out. Pinch hitter. Up comes Harry Davis. Hits the walk-off single, to win the game against the young Babe Ruth.
Nice.
So I just thought, Harry Davis, I need maybe even more of his cards, but just an underappreciated player. And the Document in the Sun is just one of my favorite sets. I love the.
It's funny that you picked him because I don't know much about Harry Davis, but there was an auction. I think it was a golden auction a couple months ago, and there was a Harry Davis Mellow Mint gum back, and I thought that card itself was just so beautiful, and the colors in it, and just the overall image and the action. And I'm like, I would love to have that card. It's just a beautiful card.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen that one. I'll have to look that one up.
Yeah.
I don't know. That doesn't ring a bell. I can't picture that card. That's great.
Well, it's the same front. It's just different backs. The Mellow Mint, I think, a rarer back.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant different set.
Oh, okay. Image on a lot of those cards, I think.
Oh,
it's a gorgeous card.
That's awesome.
Very cool. It's nice. It's nice to see that it's not just a beautiful card. There's also kind of a great story behind it too.
Yeah.
Well, I got to throw this up here. Mickey Mantle, thanks for coming. Didn't know you were still alive, but appreciate the comment. All kidding aside, great channel name, and appreciate the comment. Okay, John, let's go to you.
All right. Well, I knew Josh was going to be on here, and he recently threw a challenge out to people to talk about low population cards. So I pulled a few of my low population items that also fit your criteria, Alex. And
okay.
First one I've got is a population of 6, which is this guy right here.
Yes.
Let's get to zoom to go in close. There we go. So that'd be Edgar Charles Rice, more commonly known as Sam. And this, in being an authentic men's size, was purchased for the bargain price of $77 at an eBay auction.
Great.
But this is also the same photo used on what most people would consider his rookie cards of 1917, which are like the Wheel Baking Company and a bunch of other different backs. I forget them all. But, many folks in the YouTube community have, talked about his story of at 19 years old, his first trip away from home to start a minor league baseball career when he already had a young wife and 1 child, and tragically died in a tornado along with his parents.
Wow.
His first road trip from home, and shattered him and made him step away from baseball for quite a few years. Ended up joining the Navy and got back into baseball, joining a Navy team. and was a standout, obviously, doing that. And so then left the Navy and decided to give baseball another shot. Initially, he was actually a pitcher. So, maybe this guy's a little bit more the natural than your Eddie Wakus there, Alex. But, especially since he didn't get his career start really playing full-time until he was 27 years old. Still finished his career with 2,987 hits. So, Ichiro just recently went to the Hall of Fame, starting at, 27 and finished with a little over 3,000, and eerily similar there. And lifetime 322 batting average, actually hit 349 as a full-time player at the age of 40. So,
Wow.
Incredibly consistent career for all the years he got. I mean, was unfortunately on a ton of bad teams, being on the Senators. They had that one bright year in 1924 where they beat the New York Giants with the hat you're wearing.
Yes.
4-3. So he was a part of that club, but had a lot of losing seasons that he suffered through. But just, forgotten, relatively Hall of Famer to the masses from the era he's from. So
Right. Beautiful card.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you, John. All right, I'm gonna throw this card up. This is a card that I've shown on and off over the years, but this is a card that for me is one of those where I just love the look of the card, regardless of the player. And I think this tends to be the case with this set. This is from the T212 set of OBAC cards, and this is Jimmy Shin. So just a few notes about Jimmy Shin. Not too surprising because all these OBAC cards are from the Pacific Coast League. So it's kind of blown out here. You can get a better, maybe I'll hold it back here. He played in the Western minor leagues from 1906 to 1917. Was a top hitter in the PCL for several years. In 1908, he batted .306 for the Santa Cruz Sand Crabs. I love all these names, these West Coast League teams. Only 5 players with 200 or more at-bats had better averages in the California League, and all of them would spend time in the big leagues, including Harry Happy Smith, and Orth Collins. But Jimmy Shin never made it to the majors. He began a run with the Sacramento Sacks in 1909, hit .239 in 758 at-bats over 209 games. He tied for 3rd in the PCL in triples, and he tied Chick Gandil for 4th in at-bats. In 1911, it was said that Chin, who was apparently one of the smallest infielders in the league, plays sensational ball at third base. He was a third baseman. He's considered one of the fastest, cleverest, and most daring base runners on the coast. He's a wonder for getting on bases, and as a run getter, he has few equals. He swings the stick hard and timely. Per a 1911 newspaper article, he was given a tryout with the Boston Red Sox in 1912, but from all accounts, I guess it didn't work out. He also worked in a barbershop before playing baseball. Just could never make his way to the big leagues. He ended his career in 1917 with Salt Lake City and the lesser-known Great Falls Electrics. He had over 1,500 hits in the minor leagues. He never made it, but he did have a beautiful baseball card, and here we are talking about him well over 100 years later. So maybe he did make it after all. Jimmy Shin. All right, so done with round 1. Josh, back to you.
Okay, I'm staying with the similar theme. This is another player from that 67 Venezuela top subset, the Retirados. This is
great.
Conrad Marrero. You guys see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's great.
So he's fascinating. I'll admit I did not have an appreciation for who he was. One of the interesting things about this card, I don't know if you guys can see, right? here. You see that little indentation?
Oh yes.
So just to give you a sense of, these cards come from Venezuela, and it's hard to, a lot of them were glued into scrapbooks or, kept in very moist conditions under houses or destroyed. It was very thin, kind of fragile paper stock. So that's if they survive, and if they survive without the back torn off, which was this one did. But if they survive in any shape whatsoever, in this day and age, if they're coming, a lot of sellers from Venezuela ship them from Venezuela, and they have to go through customs in the multiple ports. And what they do, because there's a lot of drugs that ship through, is customs takes a screwdriver and jams it through the packages.
Oh gosh.
To see if anything comes out. And so that is actually a screwdriver mark that was jammed through the mailer of this package as it was getting shipped from Venezuela. So I kind of think of that as a badge of honor. I thought that was.
Yeah, I was going to say it's like just part of the story.
Kind of like on Cracker Jacks having caramel stains.
Sure, yeah, that's great.
The ones would be screwdriver marks, I guess. Yeah. So anyway, so Conrad Marrero, he was a ball player from Segura La Grande, which is in a small town on the north coast of Cuba. And he actually began his baseball life as a third baseman, but that ended after he caught a bouncer to the face and lost a couple of teeth. So he took the mound for the first time in 38, and he became successful almost immediately. And this was at the age of 27. And so this was kind of his second baseball life. So in 38, he joins an amateur league and becomes overnight their best pitcher. He started pitching his first game at 27, and he still ended up with a 350 game winner through spanning, multiple teams, leagues, and countries. So in his first year, he won 10 games with a 2.54 ERA, and then he got better and better. In 42, he went 22-5 with a 1.22 ERA for the Cienfuegos, and received the most fan votes on the Cuban national team. So fans would flock to the stadium to see him when he pitched, and he led the Cuban national team to 3 amateur World Series titles. He would not actually turn pro until he was 35 years old, and that was after being caught playing for 2 teams in Cuba. So it would take him another 4 years until he actually made it to the major leagues. So like many aging players at the time, he did his best to kind of obscure his age because he was afraid that might harm him. So it was rumored that the Senators owner Clark Griffith believed he was 8 years younger than listed. So the Saturday Evening Post once wrote that Marrero was, quote, positively 35, absolutely 37, indisputably 43, and definitely 42. So one person once said of him, he's got more birthdays than Satchel Paige would ever dream of. And I thought that was just a really cool parallel, right? Because there's all the myth and kind of mystery surrounding Satchel Paige.
That's where my head went right away. That's great.
Yeah. So when he came into the majors, he was 39, and that made him the 11th oldest rookie pitcher. And he played from 50 to 54 in the American League for the Senators. In 51, he went 11-9 with a 3.9 ERA. And in 51, he also pitched a one hitter. At that age, I don't know when did I say he came up to late 30s. So 35. And then in 52, he went 11-8 with the 2.88 ERA. And then the following year went 8-7, so kind of slowed down with a 3.03 ERA. And then in 54, he was the oldest player in the majors, and he slipped to 3-6 with a 4.75 ERA.
Oh, wow.
So when January 24th, 55, he was actually released at 43 years of age by the Senators.
So just a steady decline, yeah.
Yeah, had a decline. And then, so overall, his record was 30 in the majors, 39-40 with a 3.67 ERA. And that earned him a trip to the All-Star game in 51. And then he, which was a record for the oldest first-time All-Star, which was broken by Satchel Paige after that. And he was one of just 5 players, which include Nelson Cruz, Jamie Moore, Tim Wakefield, to make their first trip to the All-Star game in their 40s. So post-playing days career was even more interesting because after the Cuban Revolution, he was one of the most prominent players to remain in Cuba. under Fidel Castro, and kind of provided a link between old professional Cuban league and the new amateur Cuban league, National Baseball League. He was a pitching coach and was also an instructor and very respected within Cuba. And his portrait was on some of the stadiums there, and he threw out the first pitch in their '84 World Championship. And then, unfortunately for him, he did not draw a major league pension, lived very modestly in a room in his relative's Havana apartment. And then as recently as 2007, when people went on a baseball tour of Cuba, they advertised that they could have the opportunity to just pop in and visit with him. And he would have been like 95 years old at that time. So he actually lived until almost 103. He died April 23rd, 2014. He passed 2 days before his 103rd birthday. And then he was inducted into the Cuban Hall of Fame in 2014. So I think he's just got a fascinating story about, longevity in the game, coming up he did, and even some parallels to obscuring his age, like with Satchel Paige and the mystery surrounding him, and the overall just his the pride of that a lot of Latin American probably players and fans have regarding his success and rise in the major leagues. So that Cuban connection is another neat thing about the Venezuelan cards that kind of tie back to the culture and to the Latin American countries and players. So I thought that was a really neat story.
Absolutely.
Very cool.
So good. Thank you, Josh.
Sure.
Reese, go ahead.
All right. Yeah. So my next player is, I think, a name everyone will know. But again, I feel underappreciated. It's one of my favorite sets that I'm currently obsessed with. He was a 5-time All-Star, NL strikeout leader, and one of the key players in the early, Boys of Summer. And these are my 52 Wheaties, Preacher Row.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I'm just obsessed with this set right now. I'm trying to get them all the baseball with the full blue border. So I'm slowly making progress.
Yeah.
but yeah, Preacher Row was just, key member of that team. But his journey through baseball, when you look at his, where he started and where he ended up, was just fascinating. So he started in 1938 with the Cardinals, and that was under Frankie Fritsch. And he was a fireball thrower, but completely wild. He ended up being in the minor leagues then for like the next 5 years. He got picked up by the Pirates finally in 44. And that was, again, because Frankie Fritsch was on the Pirates and knew him, and they picked him up in 44. So in 44, he had a good year. In 45, he was a strikeout leader. That was the, what do you call it? The wartime,
Sure.
So people kind of, don't see that as a huge feat, but still, he was a strikeout leader for that year. But in that off season, what happened was he was a teacher, very smart guy. He was a math teacher in high school in the off season, which, back then, even the 50s, right? They had other jobs sometimes.
Yes.
And he was also the high school basketball coach for boys and girls. So in early 1956, he was coaching a game, didn't agree with one of the ref's calls, and the ref punched him. He hit his head on the court and was concussed. Some of the articles say he had a fractured skull, but it was pretty bad because he was never the same, really, for the next couple of years. He was dizzy, had, nausea, like for quite a long time. And I don't know if that's the cause, but he never got back his fastball. He just never got that back.
Crazy. Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah. So he had came back and wasn't doing that great. But in 1957, his ERA was around like 5 or so, not great. But on the Pirates, they weren't scoring a lot of runs for him. And Branch Rickey noticed this. And he had looked at him and he thought he had some good stuff. And at that point, he had gotten over at the end of that season, over all of his illnesses, whatever you want to say. And he had tried to reinvent himself. And so Branch Rickey then picked him up and he went to the Dodgers in 58.
Right.
And the interesting part was, and as you know this, Alex, he became famous for his spitball.
Yeah.
And so he changed from a fireballer who couldn't control himself to then getting some control, getting hurt. And now he's a spitballer control pitcher and reinvented his pitching technique. And one of the cool quotes I saw was by Campy. And he said, "You don't have to even give me a sign for that spitter. Don't even tell him. Don't even give me a sign." He said, I know it when I see it. I caught so many in Negro leagues that, I'm good to go. Don't even worry about it. So he was ready to go. And the interesting, he talked about how he would try to hide, the spitter. And he said he would reach up for his hat, and his teammates called it the beech nut curve because his favorite chewing gum was beech nut. And so they call it the beech nut curve. So he'd be chewing gum, getting his saliva. He'd reach up to get his hat, spit on his hand or his thumb, and then go to his belt buckle, wipe it on his belt buckle, and then on his fingers, right, to get some moisture on his fingers. And he said, once people caught on to that, then he started kind of faking them out. He'd do that routine, but then throw the fake spitter.
Right.
But yeah, he went on. Obviously, he was a great part of the Boys of Summer, and in the next year in '49, they got Newcomb, who was then obviously, and that's kind of when that whole thing started, right? Like 49, 50, 51.
Yeah.
And he was a great pitcher for them through those times. And unfortunately for him, he left or retired in '54.
Right.
And so he never won a World Series with them. But in '55, we know who entered the scene there.
Yeah.
And they won their first championship. But just a great guy. Interesting story of his journey through minor leagues and struggling with control through reinventing himself and making it onto an unbelievable Dodgers team, historic team like that. So I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, it's fun because I know Preacher O. I don't have any of his cards yet. I have a couple of those bookmarked, but I never really looked at his career and realized he had been there through all of that and missed out on 55. But he was, like you said, he was in the thick of it when they were going at it with the Yankees.
The Yankees, right? Exactly.
Which is kind of great.
Right.
Cool. Yeah, John, go for it.
All right, so I'm going to continue with 1920s Hall of Famers who might have been overshadowed by some guy in New York a bit in terms of historical remembrance. And perfect transition, completely unplanned, along with what Reese was saying, as my next card is none other than Frankie Frisch.
Hey.
Awesome.
And once again, Josh, this one is population 21.
Nice.
So this one happens to have him listed as third base for the Giants because that would have been what he played in 1921, whereas from that point forward, he was mostly a second baseman from the 22 season onward. Played his first 8 seasons with the Giants, where he compiled a .321 average, and then was part of a massive trade at the time for another Hall of Famer, Rogers Hornsby, where they swapped between the Cardinals and the Giants. And this one, the back here, this one being a national caramel, which looks very similar production-wise to the American caramel sets of that era. The backs, stylistically look very much the same, like they were made out of the same printing press. But these ones are much rarer than the American caramel sets. So, he rounded out his career with playing just as well in St. Louis as he did with New York, because he finished with a .316 batting average, 2,880 hits. And he was also considered one of the finest fielding second basemen of that era. So worthy Hall of Famer, one of the greatest second basemen of all time if you're doing a top 10 list. So, and this is, the classic, seems like pre-war pose that you see with lots of folks on lots of cards. Please focus again.
There you go.
There we go.
Boom. Looks great.
So, yeah, love this one. So, and
So
most of these are off center, so they end up, looking like this from this set. So,
John, I don't have it on me, but in honor of, they agreed with you.
Hey.
nice.
Toronto, Frankie Frisch. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Nice. All right, I'm going to try to make this one quick because, believe it or not, guys, we've got like a little over 15 minutes left. Time flies when you're looking at baseball cards, right? All right, so this is a Diamond Stars 1935 of Buck Jordan. And a shout out to, second shout out tonight to Brent from Star Huddle 77, who very generously gifted this to me, a fellow Diamond Stars fan. So real quick, Baxter Byerly Buck Jordan was a first baseman who played for the New York Giants, the Washington Senators, the Boston Braves, Cincinnati Reds, and the Phillies. He was born in Coolumee, North Carolina. Now, I was looking at his stats. He had a relatively decent career, but what I was really excited about was this newspaper article from his hometown, and they actually interviewed him later in life, and I found a couple of really fun little anecdotes that he shared. Let's see. At 20 years old, he was playing for Charlotte in the South Atlantic League. John McGraw, of course, manager of the New York Giants, came to watch Jordan and bought him and two other Charlotte players for $7,500. And he says, guess how I found out about that? We were playing in Knoxville. I got the morning paper, went to the bathroom, and read that I had been bought by John McGraw on the toilet. And the other really quick, a couple other little anecdotes. He says that he was Buck Jordan was on a Wheaties cereal box in 1936. I looked it up, and of course he was on a in a fantastic image on a Wheaties cereal box in 1936. He said, "I got $100 for letting them put me on the box. Whenever I hit a home run, they would send me a case of Wheaties. There were 24 boxes to a case." So if nothing else, we always had Wheaties to eat. Love that story. And then the last one, he played one season with Babe Ruth. This was later in life when Babe Ruth joined the Boston Braves. And he's credited as being the only man to ever pinch hit for Babe Ruth. Imagine pinch hitting for Babe Ruth. Well, obviously in later years when he's playing for the Boston Braves, it would make sense to pinch hit for Babe Ruth. So that's Buck Jordan. All right, guys, lightning round. Josh.
Okay, I probably should have done this one first, but it was a nice segue, Alex, when you talked about players being bought and sold. I mean, a lot of people know who Curt Flood is, but I think everybody would agree that he's an underappreciated player in the history of baseball for his contribution. This is actually a 66 Venezuelan. But Curt Flood, pretty good baseball player, but he was so much more than that. So he had a career hit WAR of 41.9, around almost 1,900 hits, batted 293, 850 runs, 630 RBIs. He was a three-time All-Star Gold Glover for 7 seasons, batted over 306 seasons, led the National League in hits in 64, and in singles in 63, 4, and 68. And in putouts as a center fielder 4 times, and in fielding percentage as a center fielder 3 times. He retired with 3rd most games in center field with over 1,600, just trailing Willie Mays and Richie Ashburn. But his legacy, other than being a fantastic player, was so much more than that. So I thought delving into the legal side of things would be really interesting. So long before he sacrificed his career, he sacrificed his career to challenge baseball's reserve clause and pave the way for free agency and to advocate for social change. So as a young ball player in the 60s, he spoke out against segregated spring training camps in Florida and traveled to Mississippi with Jackie Robinson to support nonviolent protests through the NAACP. The reserve clause was a clause in a player's contract in baseball that basically said the rights of the players were retained by the team upon the contract's expiration. So players under these contracts were not free to enter into another contract with another team once they were signed to a contract, they could, at the team's discretion, be reassigned, traded, sold, or released. But the only negotiating leverage of most players, awesome, was to hold out their contract time or refuse to play unless their conditions were met. But they were bound to negotiate a new contract to play another year for the same team or asked to be released. And the team did not have to honor that or trade it. And so they had no freedom to change teams unless they were given an unconditional release. And in the days of the reserve clause, that was the only way they could end up being a free agent. So on October 7, 1969, the Cardinals traded Curt Flood, Tim McCarver, Byron Brown, Joe Horner to the Phillies for Dick Allen, Cookie Rojas, and Jerry Johnson. Flood refused to report to the Phillies, citing their poor record and bad stadium, and he thought their fans were belligerent and racist. And he didn't want to just pick up his life and go to another city. So, and he was also kind of irritated because I think he learned of the trade from a reporter or somebody in the front office, not even from the manager. So I think he felt disrespected. And so he basically, they tried to get him to return to the team because otherwise he was going to forfeit his $100,000 contract, which in today's money is almost $800,000. So he did not report. And after meeting with the players union head Marvin Miller, the union said, "We'd stand behind you." And he filed a lawsuit against the baseball commissioner in the MLB. And I just thought it was interesting. I know we're in the interest of time, but reading his letter to baseball commissioner Bowie Kuhn, he said, this was December 24th, 1969, "After 12 years in the major leagues, I do not feel I'm a piece of property to be bought and sold irrespective of my wishes. I believe that any system which produces that result violates my basic rights as a citizen and is inconsistent with the laws of the United States and of the several states. It is my desire to play baseball in 1970, and I am capable of playing. I have received a contract offer from the Philadelphia club, but I believe I have the right to consider offers from other clubs before making any decision. I therefore request that you make known to all major league clubs my feelings in this matter and advise them of my availability for the 1970 season." So basically, this case went all the way to the Supreme Court, Flood versus Kuhn, and because the commissioner denied the request. And Flood filed a $1 million lawsuit. It went to the Supreme Court, and players that testified on his behalf were Jackie Robinson, Hank Greenberg, and former owner Bill Veeck. But a lot of the union supported him, but some players felt eliminating the reserve clause would actually hurt the game. So it was argued before the Supreme Court on March 20th, 1972, and they did lose the case. They ruled 5-3 in favor of Major League Baseball, citing as a precedent the 1922 ruling Federal Baseball Club versus National League. And then one of the justices actually had to recuse themselves because they have partial ownership of stock in Anheuser-Busch, which owned the Cardinals. I thought that was an interesting thing. So despite losing the case, down the road, the reserve clause was finally struck down in December 1975 in a different case. And in 1998, the government passed the Curt Flood Act, which basically revoked baseball's antitrust status. And then he was also part of something called helped bring about something called the 10-5 rule, which is also known as the Curt Flood rule, which means that when a player has played for a team for 5 straight years and played in the major leagues for a total of 10 years, he has to give the club his consent to be traded. So all of these ripple effects that started from Curt Flood standing up against the establishment have ripple effects through the rules and the players' rights that we see today. Yet you can go out and hop on eBay and buy his rookie card for raw for $15.
Yeah, totally.
It's a tragedy. And yet Jackie Robinson and all of those other firsts, who are very important people in their own right, have a much greater hobby respect as it relates to their collectability and their notoriety. So I just think that's a fascinating piece of history, and that he's someone that deserves to be honored for everything that he's done. And I, looking into the legal side of things, I found just fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, definitely, Josh. Thank you. Reese, go for it.
Yeah, ironically, my next card ties in pretty well with Kurt Flood. This player was a 5-year All-Star. I say 5-year because he was actually an 8-time All-Star because they had 2 All-Star games in 59 through 62.
Right.
He's a 7-time Gold Glove winner, and he was part of the World Series championship in 1964 with Gibson and Kurt Flood, and that is Bill White, who.
Okay.
I mean, I just feel is really underappreciated just for his life of baseball, to tell you the truth. But the reason I picked him today is because I read his book, and he just has some great stories about players he met and spent time with from, the early 50s through his career in the 60s. And I'll make it really brief. I mean, in 53 in the minor leagues, he roomed with Monty Irvin, as he came up with the Giants. But he made his rookie debut in 1956, and he had become really good friends with Willie Mays. Willie Mays was his mentor, and he actually lived with Willie Mays in Queens and would ride to the Polo Grounds with him, and they would talk baseball. And I mean, to be a fly on the windshield, right, on that car ride. But he lived with Willie and learned from him, and he was his mentor. He went away in the service in 57. After his rookie year, and came back late in 58. And at that point in 58, Orlando Cepeda had taken first base. I mean, he wasn't getting first base back, right? There's no way. So he asked for a trade, and he got traded to the Cardinals.
Oh, okay.
Where he was All-Star every year. He won 7 Gold Gloves, in those years and in the future. Huge part of that team. And if you look at his numbers, he was a consistent hitter. I mean, 290s, he hit over 300, a couple of 320 once, but a huge contributor to those teams. On that team, his best friend was Bob Gibson. So he had some things there about Bob Gibson. And as everyone knows, Bob Gibson was a huge competitor, fearful on the mound. And fast forward, he got traded to the Phillies in the end of 65. And he ended up coming up to bat against Bob Gibson in Philadelphia. And Bob Gibson told him, don't lean in. So I'm telling you, don't lean in. Well, Bill White leaned in a little bit too much. Gibson hit him on the elbow, and he yelled at him like, I warned you, you son of a, And then he said, we were good friends. He said, we went to dinner afterwards and laughed about it, So, Bill White went on to be an amazing announcer, right, with Phil Rizzuto. I grew up in the Poconos and the boonies, and when we got a couple channels and cable, WPIX was one of them. So I actually watched a lot of Yankee games growing up because other than that, it was Sunday Night Baseball, Then he went on to be the president of the National League. So, I mean, he just contributed to so many things. And if you watch the special with Jackie Robinson and all that, he credits Bill White, with they credit Bill White with huge in that whole movement and recognition of those players. So again, Bill White, Kurt Flood, was on that team as well. So I thought it was ironic that you showed a Kurt Flood card as well. Yeah. So
awesome. Yeah. Fantastic. All right, John, you're going to take us home.
All right, I got to hurry quick here because I'm supposed to hop on in the next hour at the beginning. But,
okay.
My last one is a card I gave you, Alex.
Yes,
okay.
It
hasn't arrived yet. I won this Friday night in Heritage, so it hasn't come into my possession. Population 33, and partner to my last card because it would be the guy involved on the other side of that trade with Frankie Frisch, and that is Rogers Hornsby, who, yes, he's still well known, but is he as well known as he should be? Because this guy is possibly the greatest right-handed hitter in the history of baseball. From a stretch from 1920 to 1925, his overall batting average was .402, and he averaged over 40 home runs a season. So crazy stats, but the thing where I like to really dive deep into somebody is, like many players, he was chosen to be the manager of the team because he was the best player on the team. but he was hated by everyone who ever he managed. Every single person hated him. He was known as just being where everyone had to be as perfect as he was. He was a perfectionist with his craft of batting. In fact, Ted Williams is quoted as saying he knew more about hitting than anyone he'd ever met in his life. John McGraw claims he's a better hitter than Babe Ruth. And he was obsessive about it. And he took that same obsessiveness of how all his players should perform as well. And, you know, if anyone was going to be not invited to Field of Dreams for real, you know, Ty Cobb would have been in, because that was a myth perpetuated by his bitter ghostwriter of his biography. But this guy would not have been invited. So, but I question, because I've digged into every quote, and lots of people say that every situation he was completely unemotional and unfeeling, and everything in the world to him was black and white. So are we potentially dealing with a decades too early person who had Asperger's? That's what I question, because you know, they would not have recognized that in someone.
Sure.
At that time period, you know, there was decades later before anyone acknowledged anything to do with autism or anything like that. But was he in fact, you know, an autism or Asperger's person? So that's
really interesting, John. And it actually makes me wonder, like, how many other potential situations like that exist in this era with players who just were not understood.
I mean, he got, you know, put in a position where he's in charge, and it's like, it's my way, black and white. There's no other opinions that matter. So he was hated, but
fantastic.
But I love this card. That was my favorite pose. The only other card that has it is the 1921 exhibits card. So I wanted this one badly, because most of his cards don't show his face very well. So
yeah, this is a beautiful card.
Fantastic card. Congrats.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Jealous.
All right, guys. Well, it looks like we're just in time. I want to say, Reese and Josh and John, thank you all for your time and for showing some great cards tonight. This was a great panel. Lots of great stories and great cards. For those of you out there that are still here, if you enjoyed this show about nothing, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to these gentlemen and check out their channels and their collections. Until next Sunday, or maybe the Sunday after that, because it's going to be the Super Bowl, right? We'll figure that out. Have a great week, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Check out 4 Collectors next.
Thanks, Ox.